Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
If UFOs are real, where do they really come from, and what do they really want? How much do governments know, and what are they so afraid of? When, if ever, is full disclosure coming?
Hey there, and welcome to the 168th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I'm Ben, and that voice you just heard was that my co-host and partner in the paranormal. And welcome to our Monday Drive Time show on WOON 1240 AM and www.onworldwide.com.
Okay. Now, last evening on the CBS edition of Behind the Paranormal, we began our discussion with Dr. Bruce Maccabee, an optical physicist and one of the few scientists who dedicates his career to paranormal studies. He's also one of the most recognizable names in the studies of UFOs and things of this kind because he's a real scientist who actually dedicates his life to this. Now, in this show, we continue that conversation and try to reach some conclusions about what UFOs really are, the implications for the rest of the paranormal, and what it all means for us and for our common future.
All right, but first, before that, our weekly paranormal contest. Last week's question was, this week was... why? Okay.
Sorry about that.
It's fine. What Inuit village in Canada's Northwest Territory supposedly disappeared without a trace in 1930? Wait, didn't we already do this?
No.
Yeah, we did. We did this last week.
Well, no,
wait.
The winner called in last, so that confuses us. Usually they send emails. No, it's okay.
Whatever. Yeah, well, anyway, the answer was the Lake Anjikuni village.
That's correct, yeah.
All right, and the winner was Chuck Singleton of Millville, Massachusetts.
Congratulations, Chuck. Hopefully you receive... Our prizes generally, unless they're my books, come right from Amazon, and hopefully you received yours, and knew what it was. Actually, no, there was a gift card in it.
Yeah.
Anyway, congratulations again, Chuck.
So this week's question is, in what year did the so-called killer ghost strike eastern Kentucky? If you can handle that, call us locally at 401-766-1240 or from anywhere in the U.S. at 800-449-1240. If I don't announce a winner during the show and you still think you have a shot, drop a line to me at benditbehindtheparanormal.com. And the winner gets a copy of UFO/FBI Connection by tonight's guest.
Well, we're very pleased to welcome back Dr. Bruce Maccabee. As I say, we began our conversation with him on our CBS edition last night, and I'll repeat part of his bio for those who did not hear last night's show. Of course, we do have podcasts available. I believe it's already up at BehindTheParanormal.com. Dr. Maccabee is a native of Rutland, Vermont. He earned his undergraduate degree in physics from Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Worcester, Mass., about half an hour from here, and his master's and doctorate in physics at American University in Washington, D.C. In 1972, Dr. Maccabee began his long career at the Naval Surface Warfare Center, now headquartered in Dahlgren, Virginia. He has worked on optical data processing, generation of underwater sound with lasers, and various aspects of the Strategic Defense Initiative and ballistic missile defense using high-powered lasers. He has been active in UFO research since the late 1960s. He did research for the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, or NICAP, until its demise in 1980. He later became a member of Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, in 1975. Later became state director for Maryland. And he's still active in MUFON. In 1979, he was instrumental in establishing the Fund for UFO Research. Dr. Maccabee is the author of the UFO FBI Connection, the book Ben just mentioned, co-author or contributor to several other books, and author of dozens of technical articles and more than 100 UFO articles over the years. He is a familiar face from many television documentaries on the subject. He's also, a lot of people don't realize, an accomplished pianist and novelist, and he lives in Ohio. His website, www.brumac.8k.com. That's BRUMAC.8k.com. So, do we have Dr. Maccabee with us? Well, Dr. Maccabee, welcome back.
Thank you.
Oh.
And may I...
okay. Let me put my headset on here. We got a little bit of audio here. Okay, well, how come we never talk? All right. Okay.
You ready?
Yeah, we are. Last night we discussed, we got into some, mainly the Gulf Breeze Florida case and some of the controversial photographs by Ed Walters down there that occurred in the late 1980s, and you were were fascinating in your description of how you came to the conclusion, being an optical expert, that these were not faked. And that this case was legit. A very interesting conversation about that. We got into some other photographs that listeners had submitted, and into some other things. I wanted to start tonight, if you will, with a couple of emails, because people send these in, and we very often don't have a chance to get to them if we do them at the end.
Yeah, I feel bad because we never actually get to them.
Exactly. Well, here we are, so we're going to try and remedy that tonight. This is from Peter in Colombia, South America, who's a very faithful listener of ours, and this is specifically for you, Dr. Maccabee. Ben, if you would.
All right, and it states, Dr. Maccabee, have you ever discovered any validity to any of the 1950s UFO contactee cases? If I refer not just to Adam, how do you pronounce
George Adamski, I think.
George Adamski, but to all the contactees of his era.
Frank Edwards and those guys.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, let me extend my greetings to anybody who might remember me who was living in the Worcester Polytechnic Institute area.
Oh, yeah.
And
I'm sure they're all listening tonight, especially if they're stuck in traffic.
Yeah, right. And to anybody who happens to be in the...
Oop. Oh, UFO interference. Okay.
I guess so. Anybody happens to be from South Restaurant community. Anyway, the answer to your question is, no, I have not found any validity to any contactees in the 1950s.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that I can prove that they never had some sort of contact or some sort of event, but none of them produced verifiable data that I'm aware of.
Okay. Especially when you think of some of the stories. I remember one of the first books I ever read on UFOs was by Frank Edwards. I believe it was Frank Edwards, and he was describing trips to the moon and UFOs and watching animals run across the surface and things that later apparently turned out not to be the case. Here's another one. I guess this is also from Peter in Colombia, and Ben, if you would.
Full of questions today. For Dr. Maccabee, what do you make of the alien abduction cases in which uniformed human military personnel reported seen alongside gray aliens?
Well, these are what have been termed as my labs, military abductions, I guess you're talking about. Well, at least some of them are. The question is, were abductions caused by the military, or are they just partaking in the event? I don't know. The problem with abduction stories is you never know exactly what to believe. I do believe that something strange is going on, and in some sense, abductions do occur. There are cases that have consciously remembered events. It's not all a question of people only recalling abductions under hypnosis. There are a number of, well, 1/4 of the cases people recall everything consciously, and that includes what would be considered an ordinary UFO sighting that might precede or follow, or both precede and follow the abduction part, whatever that is. But as far as the military is concerned, that could be that the military has been involved in some things. More likely to me that this is some sort of a confabulation on the part of the abductee, or maybe even the entity creatures, the UFO creatures, whatever they are, might be trying to make it look like our military is involved.
Yeah.
So whenever you get into arguments over abduction stuff, you're on very shaky ground to begin with, and so
well,
even leave it at that.
Yeah, certainly from that point of view, and also from the point of view of our work in the paranormal. When I mentioned, we work mostly with ghost research, but even with that, when you encounter entities or things that seem to be entities, you can't trust them. I mean, it's like half the time you can't. People believe everything they say, especially in the world of mediums or psychics and all this business. And I found that you just can't trust them. I don't mean to paraphrase Bill Murray in Ghostbusters 2, but you just can't trust them, I guess. I don't know. So anyway, here's this one seems to be anonymous. It doesn't say who it's from, but it is for you. So Ben, if you will.
Oh God, it's a long one.
Oh, dear. Can you make it? You want me to read it? You can lie down in the corner.
Oh, this guy's got jokes.
I'm 200 years older than you.
All right. There appears to be a serious lack of contact between the U.S. UFO research community and possible similar groups and individuals in Russia and the Ukraine. It strikes me as odd that virtually all our information comes from countries in NATO or allies of the U.S. For example, I have been unable to discover any specific alien abduction cases in Russia. Have you? Well, let's just go a question at a time. So, start with that.
Well, first of all, let me say that there have been at least a couple of books out on Russian cases. So many of them are known here in the West. We started getting data coming out of Russia in the middle 1980s at the time of Glasnost and Perestroika, and then after the Soviet Union essentially collapsed, about 1990-91 time frame, people began to get documents out of that supposedly were formerly KGB documents and Russian Army documents and so on, indicating that they were having sightings similar to what's happened in the West. I can't say that I'm specifically familiar with any abduction report from the Soviet Union, but Russia or the formerly so-called Eastern Bloc countries. But that doesn't mean that there aren't any. It's just that I haven't made a point of studying cases from there.
Okay.
All right, so the next question is, have you ever been in contact with Russian UFO investigators?
Yes. And in fact, 20-some years ago, while the Soviet Union still existed, 25 or so years ago, there was a man who repeatedly wrote to me for information, and I met some Russian investigators, including Marina Popovich, lady astronaut, when I was at a symposium in Japan back in 1990. But there is a language barrier there, and that makes things difficult.
Okay.
All right, so this anonymous man continues with, the reason I bring this up, obviously there could be different information out there. I emailed Stanton Friedman on this point, and he was only able to provide the name of Paul Stonehill as a resource for that area. With all due respect to Mr. Stonehill, whose information I find fascinating, he hasn't lived in the former Soviet Union since the early 1970s. Surely the U.S. UFO research community can do better in terms of Russian UFO investigators currently living in Russia now. I think we may be missing something significant.
Well, the name Vladimir Rubtsov comes to mind. He's written a number of English language articles about what happens in Russia. When I was at the International Symposium in Japan, Hakui, Japan, in November 1990, I met Vladimir Azhaja, a former Soviet submarine captain who had compiled a lot of UFO information on behalf of the Soviet Russian military. He told me some strange stories, not about abductions, but some amazing sightings that he was aware of that have now been published in the English literature. So there may not be a continual flow on a daily or weekly basis of information from Russia, but there are certainly research papers available to English-speaking and probably presume other language-speaking people on what happens in Russia. And of course, you've got the internet now. You can get some. We've had recent in the last few years video cases from the former Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, yeah, that's true. There does seem to be more openness than there used to be, obviously. Now, before we move on, is there anything from last night that you wanted to finish speaking about? We obviously, with the 3 breaks on that show, it gets kind of cramped. Is there anything I wanted to say about Gulf Breeze? Because we have another tack of questions here for you about other matters.
I had been pointing out that Ed Walters is the first, and so far as I know, the only person to take stereo photos of a UFO, and the stereo camera that he used allowed me to determine the distance of the object he photographed. The last case that he photographed with this big stereo camera, 2 Polaroid Model 600 cameras separated by 2 feet. The last time that he used that, in May 1, 1988, got 2 craft. One was about 400 and some feet away from him out over the water. Another one that was 100 and some feet from him out over the water. This is kind of hard to imagine faking something like that without having a lot of help.
Yeah.
Nobody ever claimed that they were accessories to Ed's photos. Now he ran into a lot of flack, especially when his book came out. About a model that was found in his former house.
Yeah.
That model was not in any one of the pictures, but it was argued that, well, he had made a model and not used it.
Mm-hmm.
Then the counter-argument was that the way this model was found made it very suspiciously look suspiciously as if it was a planted model, something that somebody had stuck in the house. After Ed had left it, he hadn't lived in the house for over a year when that model was found. But the house had been open for sale. It had been for sale for a long time, and so somebody could have walked in and planted this model. It gets to be a very complicated situation. As I pointed out yesterday, if you took Ed out of it, you still had a few hundred sightings by people who were unrelated to Ed, and at least a dozen people who claimed they saw the same thing that was in the photographs, including some very credible people who saw that.
Yes. It's amazing the politics that often accompany this work. It seems as though whether it be quote-unquote ghost hunters or UFO researchers or crypto people, they're always looking to go one better from there. It's almost like competition. I mean, to me, when you're working in the paranormal field, it should leave you in humble silence and awe and not competing with the people. It doesn't make sense to me, but I'm sure you've noticed the politics as well.
There may be the competition aspect, but there's also the believability. What are you willing to believe? What one person says is a true paranormal event, someone else says, oh, I can explain it some way or other.
Okay.
At least in the UFO business, you have their conventional skeptics out there who essentially offer an explanation for anything, whether the explanation makes any sense or not. And then there's the credibility factor of whether you trust another researcher. It's one thing to say that you yourself have investigated and you believe such and such to be true because of what you personally saw. It's another thing to say, well, Joe Blow over there, he investigated and he says so-and-so, and I believe what he says.
So much for peer review.
Yeah, well, but I mean, you come down to realizing you got to get rid of the middleman. It's just something you see yourself, not. And then, so I've generated this philosophy that you can't trust anybody else. The only person you can trust is yourself. And guess what? You can't even trust yourself.
That's true. That's true.
You're very likely to make mistakes yourself in your own investigation.
All too true.
Leave things out, get things wrong, and so on. So it gets to be very, very difficult to make positive statements one way or another about specific UFO sightings unless you yourself have investigated very thoroughly.
Very true. Ben, did you have any further questions about Gulf Breeze before we move on to some government issues?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Dr. Maccabee, what is exopolitics?
Well, I'm not an exopoliticist.
Okay. I just noticed you've spoken at a few of the conventions.
But we know it's basically the politics that may be needed for conversing and communicating with extraterrestrials, whatever they may be. I would call them non-human intelligences, other intelligences, whatever, whether they come from way out there or whether they're time travelers or dimensional travelers or something that we can't even conceive of at the present time. You know, right now, we know everybody practically here alive today is a genius compared to the people on Earth 200 years ago. You imagine what you learned.
In some ways.
What was there? There was a book written, everything I needed to know I learned by kindergarten.
Oh, that's one of my favorite books.
Well, by kindergarten, kids know more about certain things than was known by the whole community of human beings, let's say, 200 years ago. Point being that the amount of knowledge that we're accumulating is growing, exponentially. There's that exo again. Exponentially. So it's hard. We can try to extrapolate from what we know now to what we might know in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, but you go to 100 years or 1,000 years or a million years, who knows what we will know then?
Yeah.
I mean, who can even fathom?
Pretty daunting.
Michio Kaku has a book out on what might be happening in the future, but to make a prediction of what some civilization that's a million years older than ours would know, I don't know.
Well,
I like to think, for example, suppose somebody were to say that 100 years from now we'll be able to build metals or plastics or materials one atom at a time and be able to make absolutely perfect, let's say, crystals or perfect substances. They ought to be a lot stronger than the ones we have. But to be able to get the technology to do that one atom at a time is tens at least, if not hundreds of years in our future. So one can imagine what would happen if we were able to do that. One can imagine what we might be able to do with the materials themselves. Have thin material which weighs practically nothing and yet is so strong it's comparable to our modern steel or something like that.
Yes.
And that's the type of thing you might expect off a quote UFO unquote, some craft from outer space that's coming here from a civilization that's a million years older. Could be something that weighs practically nothing and yet is so strong you couldn't blow it up with an atomic bomb. I don't know. I'm just saying that it's not advisable to bet against the future.
Yeah, it's very wise advice. Nevertheless, we've had several guests over the past year talking about exopolitics, and many of them seem to be very well-intentioned people who sort of believe, and their efforts extend not just to each other or to some sort of future contact with whoever this may be, as you say, but they're also in contact, so they say, with various political leaders and heads of state today. And they seem to when they're on this show, seem to have the well-intentioned attitude that if you give everybody a big group hug, have a nice heart-to-heart, everything will be fine. And I said, I don't know if you're going to get Kim Jong-il to agree with that sort of thing, you know. And it seems to, I'm very much against assumptions in the paranormal. I think all assumptions should be questioned. And one of them is that these people, whoever they are, would want to even talk to us. Were we to arrive at a planet or a time or whatever, even through some means in which people are at the stage of development of the Cro-Magnons or even the Neanderthal, I mean, what sort of negotiation could we carry on? And we're talking about people millions, perhaps, of years ahead of us, and I question that too, because what does that mean? Is our standard of advancement technology, or is it spirituality, or intellect, or all three, or none of the above? These are all things that the exopoliticians whom I know and who Ben and I have had on the show have not really addressed.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah,
what do I think?
Yeah.
We haven't really addressed it. Not really much to say about it. You already said all that could be said.
Well, there's always more that can be said. Whether it's worth hearing is another issue.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess that's exopolitics. Okay, so I guess we're kind of floating in the limbo with that. What about if you don't mind me asking, the UFO connection? What is the UFO FBI connection? Title of your book. Where are you going with that?
Right. I guess you must have found a copy somewhere.
Anything's possible. People find copies of my book somehow. So
if you're giving one away, you better find one.
I know. No, actually, I have an in with somebody. So but we do intend to give it away.
He knows a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy.
That sort of thing.
Anyway, abduction is the book I wrote based on the fact that the FBI really did have, quote, an X-file, unquote. It was not known until in the late 1970s when I got the FBI file. I was the first person to get the FBI file on UFOs, or what they call flying discs, the flying disc file, back in 1977. What that showed was that the FBI, right at the very beginning in July of 1947, was asked by the Air Force to investigate the witnesses who had come forth and made these claims about flying saucers flying around. And the Air Force was confronted with all these sightings and wondering what was going on. And so the Air Force thought, well, it's possible that at least some of these sighting reports might be coming from communist sympathizers with the intent of undermining the confidence of the American people in the ability of the government to control the skies by talking about flying saucers as if they were Soviet craft coming through. So in other words, were flying saucer sightings evidence of subversion, communist subversion? Mm-hmm. And so the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, actually wrote a note on the bottom of a piece of paper saying, I would do it, but we must require full access to all discs acquired. And he said then, for example, in the L.A., the Louisiana case, the Army grabbed it before we got a chance to look at it, and they wanted to be able to look at any evidence, any hard evidence that was picked up. The Louisiana case that was referred to actually was a case where somebody had thrown a model of some sort into the backyard of somebody else who had freaked out and called the FBI saying, here's one of these flying discs. But anyway, this turned on the FBI. Now, the FBI acted like a black hole. Information went in, but nothing came out for many, many years. And thanks to Congress having a directive that the FBI could not throw away anything at headquarters, that meant that in 1977 when I wrote to, or 1976 when I wrote to the FBI asking for any information they might have on UFOs, they were actually able to find papers that had gone back to 1947 showing that the FBI was involved, did interview some witnesses back in 1947, then found out that they were being used to do useless work for the Army, essentially take the place of some Army investigators who were supposed to be tracking UFO sightings. And Hoover then decided the FBI would no longer be actively involved in the investigation. But, as I said, the FBI acted like a black hole. The Air Force continued to send the FBI information, and the FBI stored it. The net result was that there was some stuff in the FBI file that was generated by the Air Force but was not in the Air Force file, the Air Force file being the so-called Project Blue Book file. That became available at the National Archives in 1975 or 76. That was the 92 rolls of microfilm that contained the complete files of Project Sign, Project Grudge, and so-called Project Blue Book. Anyway, I put together a history in this book, a history that could not have been written 30 or 40 years ago because you didn't have the information. It was a history based on information obtained under the Freedom of Information Act and as a result of ordinary declassification of documents, the combination of the two things, starting in the middle 70s and going up through about the middle 90s, when information was coming out from the Air Force intelligence that had never been available, the FBI, the National Security Agency, the CIA. I have a few chapters on the CIA, so I thought about reissuing the book under the title UFO FBI CIA Connection. Well, I wouldn't have to change a thing, really. Just maybe bring it up to date in a few places, because a few things have been discovered since I wrote the book.
Okay.
But basically, the book argues that irrespective of the Roswell case, ignore Roswell, which of course would be the goose with the golden egg if you could prove it, if you could get some of the hardware supposedly obtained at Roswell. But ignore that. My argument was that the Air Force, the Army, or initially the Army Air Force, and then when the Army split off, the Air Force itself had enough information to conclude UFOs were real way back in the early 50s. As a matter of fact, I've argued in the past that if we knew everything, if we knew exactly what happened up through the first 5 years, from 47 to 52, we would know most of what all this UFO stuff is about. The big wrinkle that changed in since 1952 was the discovery of what we've been calling abductees, beginning with the Villas Boas case in Brazil in 1958 or 59, and then the Betty and Barney Hill case in New Hampshire in 1961. Those two things put a new wrinkle on that is not present in the FBI file or the Air Force file, namely abduction. So anyway, in my book, you get a really good history of the early days, and you see what the FBI did, what the Air Force did, some of what the CIA did, and you can make up your own mind from what I wrote as to whether or not they could have concluded UFOs were real. But my conclusion is that they had the evidence right there in front of them. And then the question is, why didn't they do something about it? I pointed out that they sort of like brainwashed themselves. The Air Force brainwashed itself into believing that there was nothing to these sightings. And yet the top generals we know from the FBI file and nowhere else, at least a top general, maybe several of them, were seriously considering interplanetary visitors as a solution to the sightings that occurred in the summer of 1952, when there was a huge flap of sightings in the United States. On my website, you can read the summer of 52, 1952, the year of the UFO.
Yep. Brumac.8k.com. Yep.
Right, and you go there and you search for the year of the UFO, and you'll see the amazing story of 1952. And it's amazing. It's amazing on two fronts. Number one, it's amazing for what happened, that we now know what happened. Yeah, it's also amazing that nobody realized what was happening at the time it happened.
That's often the case in history. And we've had two whole shows on 1952 and the UFO incidents. We're going to take a small commercial break here, and we'll be right back on Behind the Paranormal with Dr. Bruce Maccabee. And since the commercial we have is so outdated, I'm going to do it myself. If these big names in radio can do it, so can I. All right. It's mainly about my little publisher, Barking Cat Books and New River Press, and they're wonderful folks, and they have several of my books, and people do often ask where they can get my books, and I'm going to give a little plug right now. Certainly the one that a lot of people around here like is Faces at the Window. First-hand paranormal accounts from southern New England, and that was published in 1998. And it has the story, several of the favorite stories from southern New England here, and that would include the Pomfret, Connecticut Village of Voices case, and the great Bridgeport, Connecticut poltergeist outbreak of 1974, something my leg and I will never forget. And I was injured. Also, there is, of course, Footsteps in the Attic, more first-hand accounts of the paranormal in New England, and that has another famous poltergeist case I was involved in several years later, and a number of other things you might be interested in seeing, and getting into some of my theories about the multiverse and how that applies to the paranormal and how ghosts might not be quite what you expect. And now with Ben working with me, we're still using that theory to good effect. And, of course, the most recent book on this subject, published in 2006, would be, of course, the one that's more philosophical, Turning Home, God, Ghosts, and Human Destiny. And that's got a few cases, too, but it's mostly what this all means, because that's what I'm interested in, not just that it's there, but what does it mean for us? Is it true? What's behind it? And where is it leading us?
Hence Behind the Paranormal.
Hence Behind the Paranormal. We want to know what's behind all this stuff. Sometimes you get real surprised because nothing in the paranormal is what it appears to be, and that's a big mistake a lot of people make. I'm working on, still, Dancing Past the Graveyard, what ghosts have to say about God, and I'll keep you updated on that as well. I also, under my hat as a historian, with Glenn Laxton of Channel 12 in Providence, have written several years ago, Rhode Island, A Genial History. Now, as I understand it, being used in 4 of the school districts in our little state, and I'm kind of proud of that. So, there we are. Just check it out at behindtheparanormal.com. for my paranormal books, or newriverpress.com or Amazon.com for the Rhode Island Genial History or the paranormal books. And any bookstore can get them for you. Hopefully easier than Dr. Maccabee describes the ability to obtain his book. And I like to think that that it's not quite so difficult to do that. So there we are. That's our commercial break. And we're going to go back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno and Dr. Bruce Maccabee. And I want to give you our phone numbers again tonight, 800-449-1240 from anywhere in the U.S. or locally at 401-766-1240. And we hope we're entertaining you here in the big triangle here in southeastern New England. And if you're stuck in traffic, hope you're having a good time listening to us as you make your way home safely. Okay, Dr. Maccabee. Thank you for talking about that UFO FBI connection and also touching on exopolitics.
I'd like to introduce one more thing. I have a more recent book called Abduction in My Life, which is a uniquely written book. It's a book it's a novel with a fact book built on the inside. Unlike most novels, which do have facts, novels are built around facts of history. Unlike most novels that have facts built in, but if, the particular subject of the novel may have facts built into it, but unless the person is an expert in that particular area of study, the reader won't be able to decide what's factual and what isn't.
True.
So you have to assume that the whole novel basically is fiction.
Mm-hmm.
In my book, the fact part is so well delineated, you could cut the fact pages out, paste them together, and have yourself a reference book on UFOs. Leave it as bibliography.
Yeah.
I call this form of literature faction as opposed to fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And this faction book is a story of a person, a scientific type person, who gets involved with looking into a UFO sighting of a friend of his. And as he gets more and more deeply involved, he finds that it's a lot closer to his life than he ever imagined. But in so doing, in trying to learn about the UFO subject, he goes to the library and takes out a book called What You Should Know About Unidentified Flying Objects, which is a fact book. It's written in a different type of print, and all the pages are, as I said, if you wanted to just cut the pages out, you could paste them together and have yourself a fact book on UFOs, some of which is stuff from the FBI file, oddly enough. In any case, you learn about the history of the UFO subject, what the Air Force did about it, a whole bunch of different sighting cases, and so on. So the only problem with that book is it's never been for sale by a big organization. I have copies of it. If anybody would like a copy, you could go to my website and use the website as a way to get to my email. Or you can write directly by email to Brumac, B-R-U-M-A-C, at CompuServe, C-O-M-P-U-S-E-R-V-E, CompuServe.com. So
okay.
Send me a message and I can tell you about the book.
Okay, we have a link on the BehindTheParanormal.com website. Actually, wherever this show is mentioned, there are links to your site, and we'll make sure those stay there so people can get in touch with you if they wish.
Now, there's one other thing about the subject matter on my website, which may be more of interest to paranormal, especially ghost-type investigators. And that's the article I wrote on flash orbs. Are you familiar with the flash orbs?
Yes, I read the article.
Okay. Well, you might mention that that's something that ghost investigators, people go out into the surroundings or in old buildings or any place where there might be dust that could be stirred up. You have to be careful of looking at, little images that appear when you use a flash at night, primarily.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I've often been a critic of using flash photography in modern cemeteries because you have glazed stones that bugs reflect everything, and people say, and then, of course, digital cameras, as everybody should know, tend to interpret things depending on how they're constructed. And I found orbs that are dust or snowflakes and things of this kind, so it's well taken. I recommend that article.
I have pointed out to a number of people who ask me about this, are there orbs? And I say, yes, if you see, and there are plenty of reports of things that are seen without extraneous light, like flashlight.
Yeah.
Like flash.
Oh, I've seen them with the naked eye, yeah.
Yeah, well, the point is that those are the real orbs. if you only see these things in pictures that have been taken with a flash, then you have to be suspicious that the orbs that you get in these flash pictures could be reflections off of insects or dust particles or whatever stuff might be in the atmosphere close to the camera.
Absolutely, yeah. Can we get? Well, you led right into the next thing I wanted to just touch upon. We discussed last night several photographs, and if people want to look, if they have access to a computer right now, on BehindTheParanormal.com, there is a talking points page with talking points for this show, and those consist of these photographs. We discussed several of them, but the two on top, I don't know if I'm throwing a curveball here, Doctor, because you might, I don't know if you still have those, because I sent them to you. But
I can look them up, I guess, from the email that you sent.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't want to take too much time with it, but I wanted your opinion on these two because we didn't have a chance to talk about them. Okay. Well, actually, while you're doing that, why don't I, if you can, I'll just make an announcement that I was going to make after we said goodbye.
Okay.
But, Philip J. Imbrogno, whom I'm sure is well known to you, is speaking on UFOs, a history of sightings in Connecticut and New York on Saturday, October 23rd at 11 a.m. at the Silas Bronson Library in Waterbury, Connecticut, 267 Grand Street. And Phil is a good friend of ours, and he is very much supportive of the whole multiverse idea. He's a UFO expert, chemist, educator, and also does some ghost research as well, sort of a paranormal renaissance man. And he's the author of several books, and this sounds like a wonderful thing to try and go to. We're not that close to Waterbury here in Rhode Island, but I think I might make an effort to try and go. And so I'll suggest that you consider that, October 23rd, Saturday, at the Silas Bronson Library Auditorium in Waterbury, Connecticut. And does he have a website here? No, he does not. But anyway, we'll put some information on our website about that. So, did that give you a chance to get the pictures?
Okay.
Okay. Now, I'm looking at this one of the woods. This was taken in 1971 on my first...
This is called what now?
This is the one with the woods, picture of the woods.
Oh, okay. Baby Tiff?
Yeah, exactly. That was... this is relatively well known in the ghost world, and this was my first case in 1971 when I was a student for the priesthood. And we came out to this area known as the Village of Voices. And you could actually stand there and hear the sounds of farm life from seemingly the past. At one point, there were laughter of children quite close by. There was an ox cart driver seemingly that came by. You couldn't see him, but it was about 20 feet away, complete with the cracking of a whip and the whole business. And all sorts of things of this kind, witnessed by 7 people. And one of the things that we saw... when we had the photos developed, and again, this was in the days before digital photography. We had to get back to our home base and develop these over a period of a few days at a professional photo lab. And there was this one with what appears to be a baby-like figure literally reclining in the branches of a tree. And how weird can you get? We saw this the following night with our own eyes. And I encountered several years later a book of local history that said that in the 1700s, people, when this village was established, people would not come up to this cemetery at night because of, quote, ghosts seen reclining in the branches of a certain elm tree, unquote. So, I mean, is this a picture of what they were afraid of? I don't know. Just the photo lab at the time?
I have yet to locate what looks to me like an image of anything lying in the branches of a tree, so I don't know what you're looking at.
Okay, I think you might have the larger picture. If you look over to the left edge, about three-quarters...
a stone wall.
Yeah, above the stone wall, there's a rather bright figure.
There's a bright tilted line.
That's it, yeah.
Bright line.
Yeah, and if it was enhanced by the photo lab using the negative, and they said it looked like... almost like a Renaissance statue of a cherub with its arm under its head, as though resting. And they said
it's like a Rorschach test for the observer.
It is. I know. There's no way to say this is something. All they could say was it's an anomaly. They said it didn't look like a reflection.
It happens to be. You can see bright and dark areas in the picture.
That's the thing, yeah.
But presumably the brightest areas are where you're getting direct illumination from the sun.
Yeah.
I would say this could be something that's sticking out from a tree that happens to be illuminated and directly by the sun, and it happens to be a lot brighter than the background being not hit by light. I recall a guy who was a Bigfoot investigator who used to take pictures. He'd go to where there might have been Bigfoot sightings, and he'd take pictures in various directions just for the hell of it. Then he'd go back and analyze them, and he sent me these pictures saying, look, I found in the grass faces of Bigfoot. He considered Bigfoot to be a paranormal creature, and therefore could appear in all sorts of conditions. And so he would blow up pictures to the point where bright and dark areas might just accidentally take on the standard format of a face of an animal or a face of a human being, 2 eyes, nose, mouth, ears, and so on. And really all you had are bright and dark areas blended into the background. You couldn't really say what it was. It's just your eyeballs and your brain tend to grab onto anything that looks like a face.
Absolutely true. Yep. And then, matter of fact, we have a one that I use in my slide presentations frequently. It's a patch of ice on the sidewalk, and if you really look at it, it was taken around Christmas time, and it's got it's Santa Claus. If you look, it's got the arm raised, and it's got it looks like a bag of toys, and it's maybe just the fractal nature of the universe. But had we not seen this similar figure with our own eyes, because then again, that could, there are always possibilities that you're wrong. And then encountering that old story, I mean, who knows? But anyway, we value certainly your opinion on that.
But let's put it like this: I wouldn't use this photo as evidence that there was some spectral creature of some sort taking a nap in a tree branch or whatever.
Well, no, that's not quite how we approached it. And the original is color and a little more clear. But anyway, now the other one, it was taken. It's very dark with what appears to be some sort of you might say, I don't know, a hooded figure or something off to the right.
Moon figure.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, and that was taken outside our house by my oldest son, who was attempting to do some astronomical photography with the camera. The sky was especially bright that night or something, and there was a couple of constellations. And he comes back in the house with this. I don't know from my photographic training, which of course is nothing to compare with yours, what would cause this sort of thing. The lenses were checked. Everything seemed clean. Did you check to see if the sky was perfectly clear or if there were... Yeah, it was. Yeah, it wasn't a cloud in the sky.
Thin, high-altitude clouds that might have... I don't know what the sensitivity of the camera was, the effective f-stop, the ASA or ISO rating, mm-hmm. the speed rating of the charge coupled device, where it could have picked up some very faint cloud. I don't know if was the moon in the sky at all?
No.
Was this near a city where it could be city lights going upwards?
The town is down the hill from us, and the lights do tend to be a little bit. The light pollution, as it were, tends to be a bit worse in that direction than it is in the other direction, which is where the woods are. Mm-hmm. So, but we did kind of consider all that, and I know that with digital photography, you very often have the an electronic note, so to speak, that comes with each photo that has not been tampered with. And a lot of people, yeah, exactly, and it'll tell you the kind of camera, when it was taken, and some of the details, depending on what. But if that's not present in a photo, we've even had pictures submitted to this show that did not have that present, and I said, aha, and they look too good to be true. So, one wonders about tampering. But that was not the case with this one, and it's something of a mystery to me, anyway. But again, as you say, could be high-level clouds. But anyway, so getting back to just in our last few minutes here, one thing that bothers me, and this gets back a bit to the exopolitics, and I don't know if Ben wants to extrapolate on this at all, is that so many people assume that these entities, whatever they are benign.
Yeah, that seems to be one of the problems. I suspect that we're going to need something like exopolitics if we do establish a direct connection
Yeah.
We're going to have to find out whether they love us, they hate us, or they're indifferent to us.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's indifference, we may need a political. we may need to deal with them somehow or other.
Is there
But the exo-politicians at present, the guys who do that stuff, seem to be starting from the assumption that these are our space brothers, and they're here to do us good. I would say it's more like they're doing whatever they want to do, probably for their own good.
Probably.
And if it happens to be beneficial to us, okay, and if not, tough.
Do you get the impression that among these apparent groups who have been testified to by witnesses, that there are many different groups, some of whom may be friends, some of whom may be enemies, even to each other, never mind us? You know what I'm getting at?
Well, that certainly could be. If you go back to the Indian Vedas, stories of big battles taking place up in the sky.
Sure.
So presumably there were opposing forces back then. We just don't know how to accept those stories at face value or what they really represent.
Makes you wonder who won.
There doesn't seem to be a war going on at the present time. We don't see ion particle beams zapping through the atmosphere from a disc-shaped object going over towards a cigar shape and blowing up the cigar shape, or
right.
something like that.
Yeah.
That you might imagine out of Star Wars or whatever. But that could be that there's a Mexican standoff going on between all the powers trying to grab the Earth. I don't know. You look at what David Jacobs is claiming after years of study on his part. That
we've had him on the show.
Trying to adapt themselves to become hybrids and essentially take over. And remember, I told you about the experience of Ed Walters acting as a teacher. He sort of during these abductions, where he would be forced to undergo some situation, and then they would take him, put a special bracketed hat on his head, and then bring in some small creatures, put the same sort of hat on their heads, and then he would relive this experience. And he deduced that this is in order to teach the young ones, whatever they are, what it's like to be a human.
Yeah. Well, we're about flat out of time, I'm afraid, Doctor. It's been a wonderful 2 nights. And I guess the conclusion we can come to is we don't know anything.
Yep.
For sure. We have lots of information, but no conclusions.
All we ever needed to know, we learned in the kindergarten.
Absolutely right.
Everything else is superfluous.
Hold hands when you cross the street.
Superfluous.
Exactly. It's been a tremendous honor and pleasure to have you with us. We'll have you back again. And thanks so much.
Thank you for the invitation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll remind everybody that you can get to the Exeter, New Hampshire UFO Festival. That's coming up next Saturday on the 4th in Exeter, of course. And it's in the area where Betty and Barney Hill were allegedly abducted by UFO occupants in 1961, creating a sensation in the news around the world. Our good friends Peter Robbins and Stan Frieden will be there speaking. Maybe Ben and I will be there broadcasting, or at least recording. I don't know. Haven't gotten the final news from the town yet on that. seacoastonline.com. That's one of the places to find out the schedule. And the event is free. Everything's free. And it's going to be what you do buy in the gift booths and things will be used to help local charities, children's charities particularly. I already told you about Phil and Brogno. And what do we got? Okay, and also please visit the Justice for the Bentwaters 81st Security Police at Rendlesham Forest 1980 on Facebook. And we had a great show the other night with some of the witnesses to that, third in our Rendlesham series. So,
All right, so many thanks to our producer, Craig Pelletier, and we'll see you right here next Monday, September 6th, on WOON 1240 AM and onworldwide.com at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 Pacific. Our guest will be Albert Rosales.
Rosales, yeah.
Expert on humanoids and their recent paranormal appearance around the world. Well, flying humanoids. Anyway.
Well, flying or walking or crawling or whatever. On our regular Sunday show on September 5th, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific on CBS Radio, Boston, Detroit, Seattle. We're going to take an hour, myself, and talk about the paranormal and science. So we'll See you next time.
All right. Oh, yes, don't forget to visit our show website, www.behindtheparanormal.com, for free podcasts.
Tonight, we leave you with a quote attributed to President Richard M. Nixon. I'm not at liberty to discuss the government's knowledge of extraterrestrial UFOs at this time. I am still personally being briefed on the subject.
And again, see you next week.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.